I am a 33-year-old male from Texas, living with my daughter Jill and son Jack. For my privacy, I'm using fake names. I'm a single father. The three of us live in a 2-bedroom home in a friendly neighborhood. I have a marvelous job as an architect, and my kids enjoy a pretty good life if I say so myself. I had left my wife recently. She had been making life for me and the kids a living hell, and I'm thankful to get away from her. Everything was going well, good job, cheerful kids, it's all proper. 2 months ago, Jack had come up to me in my sleep and woken me. I looked down at his small face. It was welling up with tears. What is it? Did you have a bad dream? The man in the window is making faces at me. Jack was an imaginative boy. He had told me many stories and made up many monsters. Often he scared himself awake. I let Jack sleep in my bed, and I waited for him to go to sleep. I looked at the window, just in case. I went to the children's room and peered through the door. Nothing. The neighbor's house had a single light that was turned on. Our neighbor was a shut-in, so maybe he had set away from his work or computer or whatever he does, and Jack must have just misinterpreted him as some kind of monster. I asked Jill if she had seen the neighbor. He's always having nightmares. I can't get any sleeping next to that crybaby. I went back to sleep. 2 days later, Jill had come up to me in my sleep. The neighbor is making faces at me. I was half asleep, and I had barely registered what she said. Huh, what is it, darling? Did you have a bad dream? She repeated herself. The words finally registered in my head. She isn't the type to be afraid of her nightmares. They aren't real after all. However, this threw me off. Are you okay? What happened? She was sleeping with the curtains closed, but she had heard a little sound and couldn't remember what it was, and opened the window a little. Saw him making scary faces at her. What faces did he make? Jill was lost in thought for a moment. She made a face that unsettled me to my core. She grinned ear to ear, a little sliver of white flashing me. Jill furrowed her eyebrows and pitched her head to the side. I looked at her darkened eyes, and her arm moved in a way that mimicked playing a violin. One arm pitched up, and the other one ran over it back and forth. Bless her soul, she was too young to understand that this insane man was pantomiming some sort of self-mutilation at her. I let her sleep in my bed tonight, however I wouldn't stand for this. After she had gone to sleep, I went to go see this neighbor. Open the door, you bastard. I have a word for you. No response. If someone had seen me bashing at this man's door in the middle of the night, I'd have been carted off to prison. I gave up after a while. I can't be rash. However, when I was going back home, I saw him peering down at me from that window, but before I could turn my head to look at him, he ducked down into the room. What could I do about this man? I can't exactly have him arrested. There is no hard evidence to arrest him with, and it is not exactly a crime to gesture profanely. Either way, I need to gather my evidence. The next night I had Jill and Jack stay in my room. I'd wait for the man to do his thing, and I'd pop out and record him with my phone. I waited in that bed for about 2 hours. My legs were a bit too small for it, so I had to sort of curl into a ball, and I would read some book while I waited for him. Psisk, pska, the sound you'd use to call a cat. Then he whistled. However, it sounded wrong, like he had been whistling through his teeth. I pop out from my hiding spot and take a video of the man's face. The coward was doing exactly what Jill had described. His twisted grin shoots into a cartoonish representation of anger. I couldn't contain myself and went off on him. What the fuck are you doing, you... I'm going to let you fill in the blanks. But he turned away from the window and walked away. I decided that this time, I would go talk to him proper. The law be damned, I would get my hands on him. Before I could climb off the bed, I heard a dull plat on the window. I look at the window and there is a handprint. The house was on an elevated platform, so even though we were on the first floor, no one could reasonably be able to touch the window from the ground. However, I didn't have time to think. Someone was on our lot, and I had to make sure that my kids were safe. I call the police and run into my room. Hello, this is emergency services. Dial 1 for... I was rifling through the cupboard in my bedroom while fingering my phone to call the police. I found my handgun. My back was turned away from my room's window. Hello, sir. This is the police. What can I do for you? Someone's broken their way onto my lot and I don't know what they want. Please help me, I live on... I hear a scream and turn around. It's him. He stands there at the window with himself posed like the letter Y. I don't know why he was just standing there, but it had given me enough time to process the fact that maybe it's the stress talking, but his arms were supremely long, like twice as long as you'd expect it to be. They were practically the length of his body. I thought he was holding something, but the ends of his arms were all there. Palms, fingers, everything. I was about to fire off on him, but before I could shoot, sirens. The man's hands sheared from the joints. It was like his arm was cut off at the elbow. And then he ran away. Next, all that I can remember was the police went to investigate the neighbor's house, and they found the neighbor was dead. And when I checked the spot that man was standing in, I found a pair of disembodied arms. I had moved out of the house, and looking at news reports, a few words stuck out to me: dismemberment, days of torture, and victims barely recognizable. I'm a 35-year-old male beef and dairy farmer. I raise cows and sell them to producers. Contrary to popular belief, I spend most of my time working the fields and taking care of the farm instead of the animals because the farm provides food for them. Oddly enough, I can't stand to eat beef. Even just seeing it makes my skin crawl. I know it sounds strange, but let me explain. I had hired some contractors to expand into the forest, and I thought it was going to be all fine. But one day, my tractor broke down in the middle of a long stretch of road. It was around dusk, so I wanted to get moving as quickly as possible before the animals woke. So there I was, looking through the tractor's engine to see what had gone wrong. Turns out the serpentine belt had broken. Damn, I don't have a replacement for me. I sigh and try pulling out my phone. While twiddling with the buttons, I felt a weight on my shoulder. "Hello there, partner. I think this might be helpful." The voice was low and grainy, like someone who had just woken up. I turn around to see a flat-faced man holding a slip belt perfect for the tractor. I accept his aid and take a better look at him. However, the sun shining behind him blinds me. Shilla-headed like a shade blending into the darkened tree lines. Word of advice. Friend, you should give up your intrusion into the forest. He begins to push past me and walk past my tractor, just outside of my view. I'm able to catch a glimpse of what he's wearing. A long dark shawl decorated with what looks to be a million eyes. Give up before you wake the beast. Haul up, partner. Roll that back a minute. What are you talking about? I walk around the corner of the tractor to glimpse him. Nothing but still air. Later that day, I received a call that the contractors had found a small marsh of sticky black tar, filled with a number of animal skeletons. The farm has always been quiet at night. All the farm hands leave to go home, and it's just me in the barn. My part of the country doesn't have many criminals, and most steer clear of cattle farmers because there isn't much worth stealing. I jolted awake one night. I could hear the distant sound of my cows in distress, a dozen guttural cries layered on top of each other. It's hard to express what the sound was. It was an octave lower than what cattle typically sound like. I shuffled onto my feet and grabbed my shotgun. Usually, I'm not too distressed about these things. Most of the time, it's just a sickly cow passing or one of the pregnant ones giving birth. However, I never found there to be any cows in such a condition. I was worrying. What if a thief had gotten in, or worse, a bear? The closer I got to the barn, the more I picked up on the small sounds around me. The sound from the barn grew louder. A small whisper in the distance turned into a roaring cacophony. My head felt like it was going to spill out of my skull. But then I noticed something odd. The dull pitter-patter of hooves on dry ground was missing. I inched closer to the barn. My legs felt like a pair of stilts 1,000 miles tall. My shotgun weighed down in my arms, and I could feel the cold steel of the barrel pressing into my arm as I readied to enter the barn. I adjusted it in my hand, feeling the texture of the barrel. Smooth, finely machined steel ran across its length, interrupted by pure sandpaper. I hadn't needed to take the weapon out often, so it had grown weak. I could only really shoot it twice. The hinges had rusted over a while ago, and I hadn't thought to get it maintained. I swallowed as I pushed into the barn. It felt like a mouse passing through the inside of a snake. I entered the barn quietly. I had left the door open, and a light shaft cast through the barn. The light bounced off the floor, faintly illuminating the forms of the barn from underneath. It was bright enough to make out the space vaguely. I was so caught up in my anxieties that I hadn't noticed the barn had gone quiet. "Is anyone there?" Slam. Silence. No more light except for crooked lines of moonlight slithering into the barn, jagged and broken. Dozens of unaware black eyes stared back at me. The cows were fine, some awake, others asleep, all in order. This can't be right. Where's the bear? The thief? There has to be something in here. I aimed the gun and scanned the barn from corner to corner. Pieces of hay crunched under my weight as I walked through the barn. I scanned each of the pens, cows, bulls, and calves. I felt a jitter in my spine. Usually, one or two would swing their tail or eat a bale of hay, but they sat there ghost still, posed as if ready for a picture. A shadow passed through the gaps of light. "I'm armed, and I will shoot if you don't give up peacefully." Still nothing. I could hear the fluid in my ears sloshing around. The cold air was stagnant. My face stung from the chill, and my nose picked up on something, a bitter smell, almost like rotting meat. I inched closer to the smell, scuttling. 1,000 hooves on the hardwood. A shadow shifted through the forms. The guttural screaming of 1,000 cows began once more. The cattle were still stiff, almost like they couldn't hear it. Distorted and low, snorting and growling, it was the war cry of a great army bearing down on me. I inched away, my gun ready. I was prepared to shoot. A long shadow cut through the splintered light. The silhouette of a great bull cast itself on the wall of the barn. "Leave!" A low growl echoed in my skull, sounding like it passed through thin metal. My gut twisted into a knot, and the walls felt like they shot out in odd angles. Pitching and rotating with wild abandon, it was like the barn was melting around me. My fingers twitched. Bang! The many horned heads turned up at attention. Madness. The cattle were running into the walls, injuring each other in the chaos. However, they were trapped in their pens. My head was about to pop off, and the world was closing in. Madness, sheer cacophony. I leaned against the wall and looked forward. A form emerged from the shrieking mass. It was approaching. As it got closer, I flinched instinctively. 2 piercing red eyes were looking back at me. White, hot anger. The shotgun weighed 1,000 pounds. I shifted its weight, gasping as I tried to keep my arms straight. Bang! The barrel was aimed directly at it, still approaching. Click, click, click. What the oh no? My legs toppled. I tried to pull myself up, but they won't work. I felt a warm, wet breath on my face. It was inches away from me. Cud curdled in my throat. The smell of pure sulfur violated my nose, and before I could react, I was hurled backward, landing hard in the dirt with a mouthful of grass. Dazed, I looked up to see the barn looming over me from the outside. I had no room to question the voice. Whatever thing could do those things wasn't human, nor was it an animal, and I wanted no part of it. I sold the farm that same month and moved into the city to work as a gardener. Agriculture skills are surprisingly transferable to gardening. I don't miss the farm. But sometimes, when driving through the countryside late at night, I swear I see a pair of red eyes glowing in the distance, watching, waiting. I'm an urban explorer, 22 and female. I had always hated office work, long hours, annoying bosses, annoying co-workers, annoying water cooler, annoying desk plants, annoying. You get the pictures. It's too clean, too professional. It's like being at a fancy dinner 24/7, 365. I need to breathe, goddammit. Despite powering through the colorless gray mass of the office, I was lucky. YouTube is the place for people like me, people who hate the dullness of it all. The blue little marble, my ass. This world is like a golf ball for some rich yuppie to play with. I want to see colors. Anything aside from corporate-mandated white and gray. And YouTube is just that. It's my reason to live. A quaint little urban exploration channel. I only had 5,000 followers, but we're growing. Oh, so I thought. The unfairness of the world is real. It recently got banned. After all those sleepless nights editing videos, knowing full well that I worked the next day, I put my heart and soul into it, and they just ripped it into a million pieces and threw it away. I've tried to appeal the decision but couldn't reinstate it. It all started when I uploaded this video, exploring an old abandoned car factory owned by a cult gone wrong. The thumbnail was a picture of the factory with crazy red circles pointing at random parts of the image. I don't know what it was about that video. There were no swear words or anything explicit. I even cut out the most shocking part of the footage because I couldn't show it. So, there couldn't have been anything to offend YouTube administrators, right? I was exploring an old car factory that the Ford Motor Company once owned. I cut the wire fence surrounding the building with a small wire cutter and slipped inside. The night pressed down heavily, and I had to use a flashlight to light my path while holding a camera to record everything. What's up, guys? Ellie here. I've just broken into this old car factory, as you can see. It's been abandoned for a long time. Great blocks of sheer concrete rose around me, stained with moss and grime, pooling like dirty water at the base of the walls. Metal spires and rusted chimney pipes reached into the sky, jagged and skeletal. I ducked under vines, observing my steps to avoid falling through unstable floors. Inside, I found myself in the production line. The walls were coated in graffiti, and the room was littered with machines, most of them stripped for parts or cut into pieces by locals looking to make a quick buck. I paused, angling the camera just right to catch the graffiti. I need that B-roll. As I moved between the machines, I spotted an odd little control panel. It had labels like reset electricity and some other switches and levers. I did not know what it was supposed to do, but it seemed like it controlled the factory's power. I kept creeping through the factory, narrating the history of the place for the camera. You guys might not know this, but this factory closed in 1999. A few workers got hurt, and the company decided it was more profitable to move production to another location. Something about supply lines or efficiency or whatever. I entered a back room, finding a narrow corridor cloaked in darkness. Without my flashlight, I wouldn't have been able to see a thing. "Did you know there are rumors about strange people coming here at night?" I said, turning to the camera with a dramatic gesture. Guess what time it is? I made sure that the camera could get a good look at my brand new watch. 24:30. I polished it before coming here. It needed to look good when I was showing it off to my fans. I passed through a few more rooms, joking about graffiti or strange items I found. But then, something stopped me in my tracks. "What is that?" Around the corner, a sickly green light glowed faintly. I followed it to a small break room. There was a newer fridge and some recently added furniture, completely out of place in the crumbling factory. But what caught my eye was a tangled mass of metal and wires leaning against the wall, painted a stale yellow. Motors and pistons jutted out at strange angles. I felt a knot tighten in my chest as I got closer. The mass almost looked like a face. Wedge-like metal scaffolds formed a crude jawline, supporting a row of jagged spikes. A large piston hovered above, poised to slam the scaffolds shut like a snapping jaw. The resemblance was disturbingly intentional. The air around it felt heavy, as if daring me to come closer. Then, I heard it. The faint sound of voices shouting in the distance. The machine began to whir and buzz as though waking up. A puff of steam hissed from its form as it detached from the wall. The steam hid the form. Clicking and grinding, an electric, erratic energy emanated from the wall. A blurred mass blew through the steam and towards. I dove back. My flashlight shattered, and shards of glass were like stars across the night sky. Looking up, I saw pieces of metal glinting as they racketed and coiled, readying themselves. I scrambled to my feet and ran, heart pounding and my legs burning. I grabbed my camera, which I'd dropped, and kept running. I was in complete darkness. It felt like I was immersed in a pot of ink. I was a blind mouse in a maze full of snakes. My gasping breaths clawed at the air, desperate but grasping onto nothing. My only guide was the fading map etched in my memory, fragile and fleeting, like patterns in the sand washed away by the tide. I was just steps from the corridor exit when the floor collapsed beneath me. I fell into a shallow pit filled with skeletons and rotting flesh. The stench hit me like a wall. My stomach churned as I realized these remains had been fed to the machine. I looked up, and there it was, towering above me. its metal maw grated open with a sickening click. I made a mad dash toward the control panel. My hands shook as I flipped every switch and pressed every button. The factory roared to life, machines grinding, clanking, and then pausing. But the building shook. I didn't have time to think. I ran, the walls collapsing behind me, barely making it outside before the entire factory crumbled to rubble. As I caught my breath, I glanced back. Through the rising dust, I swore I saw two glowing red eyes watching me from the wreckage. And here's the worst part. When I got home and unpacked my bag, I found a small piece of metal I didn't recognize, pulsing faintly with a dim, red light. Anyway, I threw it into a ditch. Also, if you want to get your hands on the raw footage, please consider subscribing to my Patreon, where I drop all the raw footage from my videos.